Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome to all of you who have joined this session on behalf of Sathi Development Services. I am Sharad Bhargav. And this course for 5 sessions is now coming to an end, which is today is the last session. This course has has two parts. One was on the donor due diligence, which had 3 sessions, and we had dived deep to understand the various aspects and the kind of coverage of due diligence as far as donors are concerned for funding not for profit organizations for various kinds of grants. So this kind of due diligence is cross cutting. It doesn't matter which activity, which intervention, but it is actually assessing the organization. The second part, which is basically on grant management, is the one that we are doing. And this has 2 sessions. The first session we did last week on the 10th. And just to quickly recap what we did, just to ensure that we set the context for today's session, which, since these 2 sessions are linked, is that we understood what grant is, who are the actors in the grant, what's the grant management system overall, and what are the various processes in that system which constitute what is called as the grant management life cycle. And so in the life cycle, we had seen three broad stages at the pre-award, award, and the post-award stages. We had then seen the various kinds of funds that not-for-profit organizations get, and what is the nature of each of these kind of funds. That's very important to understand the kind of monies that not-for-profits get, what is the meaning, what is the liability attached to such monies, what is the obligation, or is there no obligation. So we had seen the various aspects related to the funds for not-for-profits, especially given the fact that there is no separate kind of you know code or book or guidance which is provided by the lawmakers. So we had actually seen what the types of funds are as categorized by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and I had referred to the technical guide for accounting by not-for-profits as the guidance for bifurcating or for classifying funds that not-for-profit organizations get. Then the last section in that session was on costs. Very important to understand for not-for-profits, what are the types of costs? Okay, what are the cost types? What are the admissibility for costs? And we had seen that, costs have to be seen not just in the natural head or the natural sense of what that cost is, but why the cost? What does it do? What does that cost actually do? Not just what the cost is. So why is it that we need to understand the function that is performed by that cost is the functional classification of cost. Now, this is very important because donors look at this in terms of how much money is getting spent on actual program delivery versus support cost. And we had seen that all costs then can be, in terms of function, be divided into program delivery cost and support cost for program delivery. Then we had seen, while budgeting, what are the costs that we need to consider, and we had seen our costs broken down by direct cost. Then we had seen it broken down by common direct, which is the common side of the direct cost. Then the third one was the shared cost, or what we call as common cost, and the common cost policy governing allocation, or sorry, not allocation, apportionment. Allocation is to direct cost, apportionment is apportioning or sharing the cost to a particular project, because the entire cost will not be borne by one particular project. So basically what we then saw was with the breakdown of cost into direct, common direct, and common or shared cost. And then some of the donors also give us a management cost, or what we call as indirect cost, which is something which is an additional to our cost structures, just to look at our long term viability. Today we are going to see the second part of that particular topic, which is again grant management. And the layout of the session is something like this. One, we will see budget, the budget types, the budget monitoring, budgetary control. That's one part of this session. The second is basically an orientation on various terms and conditions in a grant contract. Now, we fail at times to see what the terms and conditions are. So there are the general terms and conditions, and there are the operational terms and conditions. The general terms and conditions are more generic to formation of a contract. Okay. But we need to understand that, to understand what is the framework within which we have to operate. And of course, the operational side of the contract is what drives our program as well as our expenditure or our income in that sense. And the third one is some idea on challenges and tips for grant management, which I thought probably is something that I would want to share with you. Now, coming to the first section of this particular presentation, which is on budget basics. Okay. So basically, we all know that a budget is an estimation. Okay. It's an estimate. It is a realistic estimate of what the revenue or income. So in the for-profit scenario, it's revenue. In the not-for-profit, it's basically considered as income. Okay, because we had seen that we draw what is called the income and expenditure statement, not the profit and loss account. So what is the estimation of income and expenditure over a specified future period? Now, in terms of what the specified future period is for a grant, it is the period of the grant. Okay. Generally, it's the project period in case of a grant. Okay. Because the grant will then decide how much, what is the term or tenure of that grant, and therefore what is the completion date for the future period. So that is what is basically the meaning of the word budget. Now, budget is basically the financial plan for a project. So you have the project plan on the one side, and the financial plan, which is also which we call as the financial blueprint of that project on the other side. So what I say is that a particular project is like a coin, and the two sides of the coin are the program narrative or the project plan and the financial plan. Now, this is not clearly understood by many organizations because it's not considered as two sides of the same coin or two wheels of the same cart. It's actually been done separately, with the result that the kind of cohesion or synergy between the budget and the project plan, it gets lost. So the message here is that whenever a grant proposal is prepared, the proposal side and the financial side has to be anchored together. That's what the meaning is. So you need to budget the plan. Now, at times I've seen that it's not budgeting the plan, it's planning the budget, because you really are not looking at the plan, or you are not very sure about what the plan is, with the result that the plan may have certain activities which are not budgeted, or the budget may have certain budget estimations which are not planned. So it's always good to budget the plan. If there is a lot of uncertainty, sometimes we tend to plan the budget, but that's not the right way of doing it, because at some point of time, when the plan and the budget, or the program plan and the budget, get implemented, there is going to be a discrepancy between the two, which then will create a lot of problems for you versus the donor. So it's very clear that when a budget is prepared, the finance person who's making the budget understands the project proposals, or at least understand what are the various activities that have been planned under various interventions, or various interventions that have been planned under the project design. Okay, so what is the input output is something that needs to be understood. At least the input needs to be understood by the finance person so that the budgeting is complete, and the program person needs to see that this particular budget will be able to deliver the program. And that's why the relationship between the program side of the proposal and the budget side of the proposal means that the two teams, the one which is the new business development team, which is the one which is making the program proposal, or the program person, if not the new business team, and the budget side are working together. Often it does not happen. Let me tell you, in the for profit space, these two things have to go hand in hand, and chief functionary's responsibility is to ensure that the project plan and the budget are synchronized. So the synchronization or being cohesive in terms of both the plan and the budget is something which is very important. Now I can only say that they are very important. Whether you have a mechanism to ensure that that cohesion or synchronization is being put into practice in your organization, it will not cost you money, but what it will do is that it will bring about a very robust proposal, both in terms of the program narrative as well as the financial plan. Now, please remember, I call the budget as a planning tool, as a control tool, as whatever tool. Now, why is it a planning tool? Because it is a tool which tells us that the budget is now aligning with the program activities. So that synchronization is in terms of the budget being a planning tool. Now, if you migrate from the budget to the program, or the program to the budget, you should be able to see that that crosswalk ensures that there is both of them are synchronized. That is the crosswalk. So at the end of our budget preparation, or before the proposal goes out, we need to do this crosswalk in terms of, is the planning proper for the budget, which means it does it align with the project proposal objectives and activities. It's a control tool, okay, which means that you have to prepare the budget within your policy framework. Whatever is the framework in terms of HR, in terms of finance, or in terms of whatever has been assigned to you by the donor, is that is this is that framework there in the budget, and beyond that you cannot go. Okay, that framework is also the budget. Budget is that framework. Now we have to understand that that is the framework. Otherwise, we will get into deviations, or situations where we go out or we underspend the budget. So it's a control tool. Then it's a compliance tool because it lays down the ceiling beyond which you cannot spend unless you go back to the donor. And of course, the budget mirrors the financial report, meaning that the financial report is only a mirror image of the budget with the actual data. So the budget provides all these kind of functions for a particular proposal or a particular project or particular grant. We all know that all our project proposals have to follow fund-based accounting, which means that a proposal has to be seen as standalone within our organization. It cannot be considered as amorphous or something which does not have, which is fungible, which means that it can go from one to another. It cannot. It has to work like a tight compartment. So this is what the budget does. A budget covers qualitative, quantitative, and cost aspects. Quantitative means numbers, hard numbers. Cost means in terms of what that cost is. We've seen historical cost, marginal, operating, direct, indirect. That cost is to be brought in. And the qualitative bit is basically in terms of explaining the quantitative numbers as well as the cost numbers. And that's what is called as the budget justification sheet, or the budget justification, qualitatively explaining the quantitative numbers and the cost. Now, we are not used to budget justification, or what sometimes is also called as the budget narrative. Okay, the budget narrative is the narrative or the writing part of the budget, just as you have the narrative or the project narrative. But many good donors ask for a budget justification note, as it is called. And the budget justification note helps to explain the quantitative aspect for an activity and the cost associated for that activity. Why has it been done? Why has it been done? And it is also, in a certain sense, a control tool, this particular qualitative aspect, because it helps us to know that when we prepared the budget, this was our assumption for the for the quantity, for the cost, and where will it benefit, which part of our program will it benefit, is something that goes from the budget justification note, or the budget narrative as we call it. Now, many organizations have no clue whatsoever, but many good donors insist on the budget justification. And they also ask you in the budget justification note, how do you think that this particular quantitative number and cost is going to achieve the desired output? So the budget justification note, or the qualitative side of the budget. So you have the budget sheet and you have the justification note for the budget. The reason why you have the justification note is for us to be able to not only justify the numbers, but also justify why this cost and what does it do to a particular output in the program narrative. Now, the purpose of budget basically, so those are all aspects of budget that I have for you. Each of these sentences or lines that I have written have lots of meaning. Okay, so I can only drive this to a certain point. But as long as your people and you yourself are able to, imbibe this particular thing, I tell you, the one thing that we saw in the grant cycle is reapplication. The reapplication and getting a repeat grant is something which is fairly possible. Now, the purpose of the budget is uh, basically to a certain reasonable estimation of the costs, okay, for the intervention. So what is going to be the cost for this particular activity in this particular proposal is something that we are trying to estimate. This is not actual, but it can be based on certain historical cost or our assumption of what it should be available for. Even if we don't have historical cost in our books, we can go in a certain in the market, we can see our books historically and see what the cost is going to be. A lot of our HR cost might be driven from our HR policy framework, which is, of course, the control tool, budget as a control tool within the policy framework. So, how reasonable the estimation of cost is, that we can be, because this is only an estimation. The actual spend will give you the actual spend number. This is only an estimation. So that's why I call it a blueprint. You have a blueprint of a building, and the actual building will come much later. But you have a blueprint, and then you can see versus the blueprint, what did the actual building look like? Okay, what changes did we have to make? So the blueprint, when you make, there should be a good way of estimation or reasonable estimation, which should be backed with some kind of data. It should not be just backed on the basis of some hearsay or some vague numbers, because then the difference between the estimation and the actuals might actually get into trouble. Now it segregates costs, which we have already seen. It segregates direct cost, indirect common cost, indirect cost, or OH cost. So we are able to see all kinds of different category of costs in a budget and in a particular hierarchical or systematic manner. Then there is the possibility of cost sharing or matching, what we call as co-financing. If the same particular project is being funded by another donor, by your own self, or by the community, then that can also be made part of the overall project budget. So you might have a budget where the grant request is only for 1 CR, but the total project cost may be 5 CR, where there is a lot of cost sharing that comes from different pieces, people. So how do you see the complete picture for this particular proposal in it gets reflected in the budget in terms of the co-financing, as we call it, okay, or the cost matching or cost sharing. It's a framework for donor donees. Okay. Basically, for a grant award, this becomes an outer boundary. So both of the donors and donees agree that we will work within this framework as far as this project is concerned. Therefore, I call it a framework. It enables course correction. So the budget estimation is one document which helps you to then run your implementation, and during the course of the implementation see where there are deviations. So for that you can go back to the donor and say we want a correction in our budget or correction in our project narrative, whatever it is. So what I'm trying to say is that the budget becomes the reference point for any change, alignment, realignment, reallocation, or readjustment, whatever you might call it. No standard word in our not-for-profit sector. So whichever word one wants to use, what convenient. But what I'm trying to say is that this becomes the framework, this becomes the benchmark or the point of reference on the basis of which you can tally your actuals and go back for for a timely correction as far as your budget is concerned. Because at the end of the day, all projects need to be funded, and the funding has to be sufficient, because unless we have unlimited cost matching that the organization can do, which is just not possible. So what it does is it enables recognition. It enables recognition of the activity with a set of activities making up a group. Okay. The period for which that activity, or the period that gets captured, the income, the expenditure, if there is a deficit or a surplus, all that gets captured in terms of recognition. Budget and the budget monitoring or the budget variance, they will all give you these particular details, which are very, very important. Do we even recognize these when we do our work on in our offices on field? I don't think so. But what I'm trying to bring to you is that if we were to look deeper, then we will be able to migrate or crosswalk each of the activity in the program budget, in the program narrative, to the budget, and we should be able to see that, because that's what is going to help you in your budget monitoring, both for the program folks as well as the finance folks. Now the group which is at the higher level, or which gives you the trend for particular in group category, is very, very important. So the activity is important, and then it grosses up or rolls up into the group, but the group gives the donor, more importantly, and the top management a much better handle in terms of where where the project and the project budget is going. The period, the income expenditure is of course what we understand, because we saw that the budget is a estimation of income and expenditure. And are we getting into a situation where there is either a deficit or a surplus? Again, it's a matter of budget monitoring, as we will see. Okay. So how do we do that? We need to know, and can we set up systems to do that, is something that we need to understand. So the prerequisites for a good budget is basically the organizational structure for the budget, which means right kind of people for the program on the program side, and right kind of persons for the from the finance side, to be able to understand the nuances of budgets and programs. Data, very, very important. Chart of accounts, which is basically important for classification of the cost that you have, and for you to be able to capture it. The management support, I don't have to say that. And there has to be a formal process for formulation of budget. Now this is very, very important. That's where the difference actually, or the variance in terms of what the project proposal should be, comes up. So you must have a process of it might be written somewhere in your finance policy when you have your section or chapter on budget and budget formulation, but it's not practiced is what I'm saying. So there has to be a formal process for formulation where at each stage there is a check and balance in terms of formulation of that of the budget, so that we don't end up either under budgeting or over budgeting. Okay, because we have seen there's a lot of competitive risk in this sector these days. So these are some of the points that I just wanted to say in terms of a good structuring for your prerequisite for budgeting. Now, types of budgets. Basically, there are two types of budgets as far as not-for-profits are concerned. One is at the activity level, which is at the granular level or at the floor level, as we call it. So that those activity or the activity based budget says that you are breaking down a particular activity in terms of what it entails or sub activities that it entails to complete the activity, and what are the resources required for doing that, including the cost. That is an activity based budgeting. So the ABB, which is the base from which budgeting starts, is one that looks at the resources that are required for that activity. What is the activity, what are the resources that are required, and what is the cost for that activity, for those resources to complete the activity. Now, for instance, an activity, if you have capacity building as one of your strategies for the project, then of course workshop or training could cost would be one of the activity. Okay, within, so a particular workshop, maybe a particular workshop for resource persons looking at for community civil society organizations leaders, for instance. Okay, civil society CSO leaders ka workshop is one activity within several activities that you may have as part of capacity building. So capacity building is your broad category. And within capacity building, you will have several types of trainings, several types of meetings, several types of exposures. All that will be the activity within the broader category. So at the activity level, again, where does it come from? It comes from the specific section on capacity building in the program budget. Okay. Oh, in the program narrative, not in the program budget, in the program narrative, where the program says we will do this particular training capacity building activities, and what the outputs will be is the point where you will have to go for budgeting your capacity building budget. Okay. Now, this particular thing, yeah, this particular slide that you are seeing is basically the ABB, which is for a particular workshop. What are the sub activities that will make up the activity? Sometimes this is also called as subline budget, subline. Okay, and subline budget as far as the activity is concerned. Why we call this as subline is because there is something called line budget which is coming next. Okay, therefore this line budget is one thing, and one step below the line is the subline actually. Okay, so that is why it is also sometimes called as the subline budget. Okay, now workshop will be your subline, and these activities can also be called as subline. Okay, so you'll have this kind of they are nowhere in law book, but these are used as convention over a large period of time, more driven by foreign donors. Okay, more driven by foreign donors, but that's become the kind of convention and the way we talk about these words. Okay, so the activity level budgeting will say what are the sub activities in that activity and what resources are required and what is the cost. This is what you can see in this particular table. हमको वेन्यू चाहिए, हमको रिसोर्स पर्सन चाहिए, हमको फूड चाहिए, we need rent for this thing, for furniture, for equipment, whatever. So I'm not getting into that detail. How much is it required? What is the cost for that? And what is the total cost for completing the activities using a set of several sub activities? Okay, understood? So that is the activity level budget that we have to prepare within a broader category of what is called as the training budget or the capacity building budget. And that budget is what is called as the line item budget. Okay. So this is convention in the not-for-profit space. So we have the line item budget. Now the line item budget presents the budget under broader heads or what we call as categories. Okay. So broadly, the income is grant income, but the expenses are put in categories. So the categories can be broadly HR, travel, capacity building, other costs, program, cost. All that is the broader category. Office cost, all that will be the broader category. Fixed assets, monitoring and evaluation. Okay, so these can be broader or what we can also call as MEL or research, whatever you might want to call it. There's no standardization again. What I'm trying to say is these become the broader categories that we have to be referred to. So many of the donors like USAID and EU, European Commission, EC, they actually prefer the line item budget where for all the activities and sub activities in that line, they are reflected at the top level. This is the budget for this particular line HR, this particular line travel, this particular line F&E, furniture and equipment or whatever. And this is what is also sometimes called as the rolled up budget because all the activities and sub activities have been rolled up into a certain line. That's why it's also called as the rolled up budget. Now, why the rolled up budget is because it gives better understanding on the major cost categories. Now, donors might not be interested on how much money exactly, at the top level, they might not be interested on how much money was paid to a resource person for this particular training. Now, that's okay. That needs to be done because that's from the accounting point of view. But they want to understand what at the line item level is the budget. So is the budget on HR more than their estimation of one third of the total budget, on travel as more than 11%? So each of these donors have some indication based on their past experiences of how much should the line actually account for in the total budget. And therefore, in terms of category tracking, category understanding and tracking, the line item budget is something that is preferred by many donors. Does not mean that we don't have to do the activity budget, but the line item budget also helps management to understand how we are doing worse on all these lines, because the lines are the top level reporting categories for the budget, which will be just 5 to 6. And within these 5 to 6, there'll be several, may not be of great interest to management. But these 5 items, 5 lines will then say what the budget was and what the actuals are. I think the analysis and the monitoring is much going to be much better, because at the micro level the program and the finance folks will do it. At the macro level the top management will have to review it, and that monitoring has to be in terms of understanding whether we are going in the right direction, both in program, also in terms of the utilization of budget. So both the activity based budgeting and the line item based budgeting different in terms of formulation, but also give different kind of color or flavor to what we are trying to get. Now, this is something which you will see here, an illustration of a line item budget. So you might have human resources. This is all indicative. Human resources, where you'll have all these costs of the CEO and the others, the travel cost, equipment and supplies, other direct costs, and the overhead. Okay. So now these human relations, the HR, human resources, the travel, the F&E, these are the line items. And within the line items are the activities and sub activities. Okay, so that is something that is preferred at times. By it does not mean that the activities will not be budgeted, because the line item budget is nothing but a consolidation of the activity based budget for that particular category. Now there are other types. So broadly, when we budget for not for profits, is these are the two kind of ways in which presentation and formulation of budget happens. Now I will also tell you several other types of budgets may not be of great use all the time for not for profits, but good to understand. Incremental budget, we all do that. Incremental budget is the budget for the next year as to account for inflation or increase in cost for the next year. So whatever is the incremental budget provides for a certain percentage. However, we need to be very consistent and rational in terms of our increment that we will apply, or do we need to apply increment for all activities and all sub activities? May not be necessary, because some of the activities may be very new in the next year. They may just not have be there in this particular year. So there's no inflation there. It will begin with a base number. It will not begin with an inflation. So what I'm saying is that one, the incremental budget is something that is permitted. What is the percentage of increment should be driven again by your policies in a certain sense, and also should be driven by historical cost. So there has to be a rational, consistent, reasonable way of ascertaining the increment for subsequent periods. Okay. And whether that subsequent period all the time it has to be applied, but if it has to be applied, you have to be consistent. That's what is called incremental budget. Then we have so there are two, three of these other ones, the value proposition budget, which is basically saying that the budget is prepared based on the value that the project will deliver to the beneficiary. So we are looking at what is the final output, and then we are moving backwards to say that for these outputs, these are the critical inputs. And those critical inputs, if we budget, is something that we will actually lead to the value proposition that we want to offer to the beneficiary. So this is also called as the value proposition budgeting, or is also called as the priority based budgeting. These should be our priority inputs for being able to give value, or it's also called as the value based budgeting. Not necessarily implemented in our country, but what it focuses on, this kind of budgeting, is what is it that we finally want to deliver in terms of our services. Is then backwards back end we go and want to identify only those resources and cost them that we think will have a direct relationship with the value offering. Okay. Then you have the ZBB, which is the zero based budgeting, which is done in government mostly, which says that you do not use historical data. So what today, if so the zero based budgeting is always futuristic and does not use historical data in a very great sense. You identify what is the need for a particular activity, and the efficiency that needs to be ensured for that activity, and then you budget that or you cost that. There is no history of those costs. So the formulation is from period zero, and it includes only operational and expenditure costs which will be meeting that need. So this is mostly done in government, where you are trying to rationalize the cost in the budget. There is something called the performance based budgeting, or the PBB, which is somewhat used in India now, where they will say that we will give you a budget. Okay. But your budget will be based on your performance, that is on the outputs delivered. So the budget is not in terms of exactly monitoring or checking the financial spend, but in terms of the performance delivered through a third party or through a mechanism which might be there. So that is what is called as performance based budgeting. Performance based budgeting has been tried in many interventions, more so in health, where you have uh, the impact bonds that are there, where performance budgeting is done. Your budget is based on your performance. So if you perform, you will get the budget. If you do not perform, you may not get the budget. Oh, okay. So that is what sometimes is being done, but not routinely. Routinely, what we do as budgeting is what I've shown you in the previous slides, and of course, the incremental budget. But this will help you to understand where the costing needs to be there. The costing needs to be squarely not in terms of process, but squarely in terms of output and outcome. That is what should be the should be driven in our people's minds, that where the money has to chase is where we have to deliver on the services. The fixed budget and the flexible budget. Now, fixed budget means no variation allowed, okay, both in terms of cost as well as terms of units, or unit of activity or the actual activity, which is generally not what is done. So we have a flexible budget where the activity or the units might vary and the unit cost may vary. Why? Because we have to account for a budget as an estimation. So you can't have an estimation which will be as good as actual. That might be very theoretical, or it might be the case only for a very short duration budget. But we have where we have community driven, I mean, community delivery service delivery budgets, where there is a lot of variation that is possibly likely to happen because of uncertainties. We have this very flexible budget, but the flexibility is capped at a certain percentage, I mostly of the unit cost, or either at the activity level or at the line item level. Now you'll have to see your budget, your grant contract, to see whether there is a flexibility, but the flexibility has a tolerance. The deviation has a margin of ceiling, or a ceiling beyond which you cannot automatically make the budget look flexible. Then you'll have to go back to the donor. That's what I'm calling as the margin of tolerance, or the deviation, which may be permitted based on your grant contract at the activity level and also at the line item level, both also, or maybe only at the line item level, which means that if there are variations in the lines, that variation can be accounted for without having to go to the donor. That's what is called flexible budget. But flexible budget doesn't mean a budget which does not have any ceilings or tolerances in terms of deviation. Now, I was talking to you about the budget justification note, which is what is basically a separate Word document that is attached to explain the budget numbers. This is a very good tool for planning, because it helps both program and finance people to also understand what is the total resources that need to be committed for this activity. So for each line item and each activity, the details have to be provided as to what what will be required, and that can be validated during implementation. So for instance, you say that for this particular line item of capacity building, I will do this activity of training of ground functionaries or frontline workers. Now, the frontline workers, my understanding is that we will have to do frontline workers training for these many frontline workers. This will be these many number of trainings we will have to do. Our estimation is that this will be the cost for this and the period during which we will do it. And then you can explain that this cost that we are budgeting here is based on historical cost uh, for such trainings, for such numbers. This is what is the justification note, or the budget narrative. Now this helps when the actual implementation, because that is the time when you estimated your budget, but now you are doing your actual implementation. So at the time of actual implementation, the program person, the finance person can see what was in our mind when this particular activity was designed and the budget for that was formulated. It is a very good tool. And then also say which of the outputs it's going to affect. Okay, so this is a narrative, just like you have the program narrative of the budget number. Okay, demonstrating the necessity of the cost and how they relate to the program. Why do we need this cost? Okay. And what will it do to a particular program activity? So there's this justification that comes uh, on the calculation of the estimation cost. So very, very important to have this. I have seen that where the budgets have a budget narrative or a budget justification node, the activity implementation is much, much better because the budget sheet will have only certain numbers. You'll have the unit numbers, now the unit cost and the total cost. That is what will come there, and the unit of measurement, whether it's a round trip or whether it's lump sum or per activity, whatever it is, that's how the budget is. That is the budget sheet. But how did we arrive at those number of units, 92 or 163 or whatever? Now, the 163 came in terms of these many number of trainings or these many number of people, and the unit cost again is 785 rupees. Now, where is this 785 going to come from? Once the grant has been sanctioned and the budget has been frozen, I think nobody will remember where this 785 rupees came from. That 785 rupee explanation will be there in the budget justification note. And that budget justification note will come handy to explain each of the numbers in your units as well as in your unit cost, okay, as well as your incremental budget. So it's very, very important that you have a budget justification note as far as each budget for your grant project is concerned. Now, the balance, surplus, and deficit budget is very, very simple, where you have a income more than the expenditure, you have a surplus, you have a deficit in case you have it the other way, and balance is something that we finally balance based on our grant budgets, just to ensure that the income and expenditure at the end of the day is the same. Uh, so the end of the day, we should neither be looking at surplus or deficit, but we should be looking at a balanced budget, at the end of the day at times of closure. Now, budget monitoring and budget control. So these are two specific separate activities. I am not saying they are compartmentally separate, but they are to be looked at and thought as separate. Although there is some kind of an interface or an interface between the two, or sometimes the two might, intrude into each other's area. Budget monitoring basically means, yeah, we are talking of budget monitoring right now. We're not talking of grant monitoring. So I'm looking at the budget side of monitoring, budget side when we are talking of monitoring. Now we have our record of our accounting record in terms of our tally record mostly, which will say this is the actual expenditure. Okay. So the actual expenditure gets recorded, and it's very necessary that you record that in time. So the actual expenditure gets recorded in your book, and you have the budget as your budget sheet. Okay. Now, the recording of the budget can also happen in tally, which means you can set up your budget by line and by your activity based on your chart of accounts. Using the chart of accounts, you can set up your budget. So the budget setup will be static because the budget has been set up, and your actual numbers will also come into tally at every period, completion of period of time. Now, the comparison between the two, which is your budget estimates for the activity or the line and your actual recording of expenditure for the activity or the line, is what is called as the variance report, the budget variance report. So you need to measure the variance using a budget variance report. We call it the BVR at times, to ascertain whether there is positive or negative deviance from the budget estimate. Again, you remember budget was an estimate. The actuals are real, hard, actual spend numbers. And that is what we need to recover from the donor for our project, because we have no other way to fund that particular expenditure, whether it's less or whether it is more. So if there is a deficit, we have spent more, it's a negative deviance, positive deviance if we have spent less. But we must know both. We must know both. We must know whether there is a positive deviance or a negative deviance. Does it take extra amount of money to set this up? No, it requires the mindset to set it up and the discipline to set it up. Okay, whatever is the work plan that has got delivered, okay, uh, that can also be seen or mapped to the budget utilization. So you can also see when you have the actual numbers and you also have your program, you might not have 100% matching. Okay, it's not possible to have 100% matching because some activities might have to happen only by middle or the end of the project, doesn't matter. Okay, but even if that is the case, then the program outputs which was also an estimation, and your actuals, how much have you delivered, your budget estimation and your actuals, how much have you delivered. Now if you plot both of them, then you have what is called as grant monitoring. You then are able to see, and this is not difficult, it is something that is recommended, that is what should be done actually. जो मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ is something that is so important that if you make it part of your procedure and your system, I can tell you, you will never fail in grant implementation. This is something that is not done. I'm very clearly saying, but should be done for ensuring that you have a repeat grant. So budget monitoring is not something that you will do at the end of the budget period or two-thirds or three-fourth period of the budget project term has come to an end. Now you start doing the budget monitoring. Budget monitoring should be done on a monthly basis, irrespective of 3 year budget, 5 years budget, 4 year budget, whatever it is. It should be done, and we should have a system where not only the budget monitoring, but also the program monitoring and the correlation between the variance report of budget versus program. So if you have a program where your output was 1 but 0 has been done, then technically in terms of the budget estimation at 1 rupee, the budget utilization also should be 0. Okay, so you can see proportionately how you are doing on the program and how you are doing on the budget at that particular point of time. That's something that is easily possible through Tally software, because you can set up the budget and you can get the budget variance report real time, even not even 30th, up to the time that whatever has got recorded, you can generate that report from Tally without having to put any more resources. Now, that is one side of monitoring. But what does monitoring do? It also has to have what is called as the budgetary control side. The budgetary control is the action part of monitoring. Okay, that is why I'm saying there's a distinction. So the monitoring is the process, the control is the actionable. So whatever we have evaluated at the time, whatever has we have got by way of budget variance report on a monthly basis, and that has been discussed and that has been evaluated, does it give rise to a need for action? Okay, so if you are based on your monitoring, your actual income, your actual expenditure versus the estimation, there is a big difference. Okay, that is being thrown up by the variance report. This becomes the trigger for an action with the donor. Now you don't do the action with the donor at the end of the period. Now you might say this is something which is so common, but it is not being practiced. If you have a budget monitoring or a variance system, you will automatically have the next level, which is the budgetary control, which is the action post the monitoring and review. And this action in terms of budgetary control will ensure timely, action or approvals, which is whether a budget realignment, reallocation, no cost extension, whatever. So it only shows the donor also that this implementing agency is on top of not only of their budget as well as their project. Now, this particular part is the budget monitoring, because the budget monitoring and the program monitoring, while they go hand in hand, I am talking of the budget monitoring and control side, where we are looking at the budget utilization versus estimation. And after we have evaluated the budget variance report, which has the actuals versus estimation, is there a need to work on a course correction at that point of time? Okay, budget helps us course correction is what we have to see. And at that point of time, if you take action, probably it will be easier for you to convince the donor and take that action. As far as interest apportionment is concerned, I have also shared with you, and it's very important to know this. I mean, people who are doing this presentation, they must share it with their other people, that if there is a common pool as far as project funds are concerned, and we have to respect the concept of uh, fund based accounting, then in that case we need to have an appropriate apportionment mechanism. And I had shared with you an Excel sheet where even if you have pool funds for a common pool for several funds, you can apportion the interest there. However, if the donor has stipulated that the grant has to be in a designated account that has to be opened, then of course there is no question of apportionment of interest, because the interest will fall in that dedicated account. Okay. Please remember that interest can be additive or deductive. What I mean by additive or deductive is, and that will come from your grant contract. Does the donor say that the interest will be in addition to the grant amount? So your grant contract is 1 rupee. Will this interest be 1 rupee plus, or will the interest meet the grant up to 1? Which means if you earned 2 rupees, 100 rupees was your grant and 2 rupees is your interest that you earned, then the donor will give you 98 rupees. That's what is called as deductive. So you'll have to see whether this or whatever, or the contract condition could be that the interest can be retained. The condition can also be that even though the interest is additive for the grant, you will have to go back to the donor and say, this is the total amount of interest. Please let us know on which activity in this grant it has to be utilized. So you'll have to see all possible options that are available and what the grant contract says. If it is additive without condition, then it is your other income in a certain sense. It's money available with you that you can utilize. And therefore, if it is additive without restriction, please try to maximize the interest earning on the grant contract. There are various ways of doing that. I'm not saying you have to uh, take risk, but what I'm only trying to say is that you can use good common sense to be able to generate interest if that is additive, because it will be an unrestricted fund for you. Similarly for HR cost, because HR cost can be direct, it can be common direct, and it can be shared. So very important, because this particular line item, which will consume close to about 30 to 40% of the budget, is a major pain point for donors. Okay. So you must have proper mechanism for contracting, for your engagement letters, for the type of engagement that you are doing. What is the compensation? Does it match with the HR policy? Uh, uh, where have you budgeted that particular person whose salary or whose compensation is being drawn for this particular project? So if they are direct, the salary register will only show their 100% compensation to this particular project. If they are common direct, then some percentage of their compensation will go directly to the project, and the rest will go to shared cost or common cost. And then how have you apportioned common cost over a period of time to several projects or to your own core fund? It will all depend on how you have made the salary register or your salary sheet. So it is very important when you make your salary register to not just make a compensation register or whatever register you might call it, not only to show the compensation, but also to show the project allocation and the funding streams. You can do that in one or two sheets for a particular month, and that will give the full story for the organization. And therefore, there will be no conflict in terms of double dip or double calculation or any such situation where you have failed to recover certain HR costs. So what is important is your attendance, your timesheets, your contracts, your budgets, your policies, and finally, when you are processing your payroll or your whatever, then in that case, you will have to have proper documentation to show that the real cost that you have allocated, so real cost meaning the direct and the common direct cost can be easily, earmarked and identified. The more important thing is the shared cost and how that allocation will happen to various projects. Or if to all the projects that you have apportioned, still you are not able to cover the cost, then the organization has to meet that cost from its own resources. So it also helps you to understand whether you are forced to meet HR cost from your own resources, and what is it that you need to do to ensure that those costs of HR, whether they are direct or common or shared, because they need to be incurred for the organization to survive and to continue, these are recovered mostly from projects, because otherwise how long can you actually fund those costs from your organization's resources? There's hardly any finance organization resources except some unrestricted amounts that you might be able to have. So it's very important to have those numbers, and the salary register or the monthly salary sheet is one good way of tracking. And you will also then be able to see how much you can recover from other projects or how much more projects you should get to be able to fully recover the shared costs. So the HR cost allocation is a very important factor as far as grant management and grant monitoring is concerned. Now, robust grant monitoring, I told you when we were talking about budget monitoring. So the grant monitoring is a combination of budget and program monitoring. That's why. That's the only difference. Nothing, same thing, except that you are now looking at the program progress also in addition to the budget progress, and that's the common meeting with the chief functionary may have with the program folks and the finance folks together, and that's the right way of doing. It's not just good to have a budget monitoring exercise or a budget monitoring review meeting. Good to have it, good, because then it helps you to understand the budget. But for the grant or for projects, the monitoring should be done uh, at the grant level, both for the program people, both of the program and the finance people put together. Then you will have the course correction or the way to handle it much better. Okay, so the one important thing is that there has to be an understanding of terms and conditions of the grant contract. मैंने आपको बोला है important tools and processes for grant monitoring. Complete understanding of terms and conditions of the grant contract. This is also something which is lacking. Doesn't cost you, but it helps you to make your terms and conditions clear to people who have to handle that grant. Not only the terms and conditions, but those terms and conditions is actually the expectation from each of those persons, and that is something that is very important. Budget and the log frame. Okay, so the log frame approach, you have the you know the goal level and the outcome level and the output level, the the inputs and assumptions, they are clearly not known to the finance and the program people. So the budget variance, we have already seen timely course correction and timely reporting. So the grant monitoring also will help in terms of the reporting part, both the narrative and the finance, because then you might have to do some bit of thinking in terms of saying, when we are reporting, this is how we will report given the outcome of the monitoring exercise that you have done for finance and program. So you might have to put things in perspective and say, well, this particular activity we may not be able to do because, or we might want to replace it with this activity, and this budget that we don't want, we haven't spent, we want to replace it with this activity as a reallocation or a realignment. And that is something that will help the donor very clearly understand. So the budget or the grant monitoring should give a more clear picture of what the correction is and what the reporting will help in making that correction. Now, coming to the second part, which is the grant contract. Now, here also, I want to just say that grant contracts are never taken seriously. And it's very important that we understand the grant contracts. It's not very difficult because, sometimes the donors might put conditions which you come to know of later. And therefore, it's very important to understand terms and conditions of that grant contract. I have tried to break them into two. One is the general conditions. And at times some of the donors talk about special conditions explaining the general condition. Okay. And there will be the operational part, which will be your project design, your budgets. That's the operational part. So we are going to do that in two parts. Please remember, sometimes I've seen a lot of contracts being done in the grant contracts being done in the nature of MOUs. uh, an MOU is not a legally binding, it's an intention of two parties, it's an understanding, not really a contract. I'm not going into contractual language, but I'm only just wanting to make you understand that when you do a grant contract, that's a two-way obligation, both for the donor and you as a grantee. So look at the grant contract or the grant agreement as a document which can be contractually enforced, because I'm not saying it has to be enforced anytime, but it should be possible to enforce it. Okay, because you're spending money, you're spending resources, and suddenly it might not happen that because of certain conditions, no, you are not able to get the money, because where else will you get the money from? So it's very important to have clarity in terms of the differentiation between MOU and agreement, or a contract or a grant contract. Sometimes in CSR, you have what is called as the purchase order, very, very, dicey. So it's always good. They may want to still continue with the purchase order, let them. But you please have a different contract, which is the grant contract still, so that when you have to protect yourself, you say they set it up as purchase order because their system says you have to generate a purchase order. But our principal agreement was a grant contract or a grant agreement. Now, coming to what are the general conditions, I'll take them one by one and just kind of help you to understand that. The recitals or the preamble. This is a paragraph at the beginning of our agreement which says, why do these two parties, what is the intention of these two parties? That's the preamble. The two parties, because they bring their own specific set of uniqueness, now want to come together. The grantor because it wants to work, it has the money; the grantee because it needs the money and has the requisite expertise, experience, and connect with the community, and in that particular area or sphere of intervention, whatever you might call it. So basically the recitals or the preamble help us move forward, have helped us to move forward into getting into an engagement. Okay, that's the preamble. The definitions can be the various definitions or words used in the grant contract which have been explained here. The grant amount and the purpose is something that is coming quite clearly. As soon as we talk about the fact that we have come together for a grant contract, then what is the purpose? Based on the recitals, what is the object for which you are now getting funds? What is the grant amount? It must be this particular, you know, general conditions and operational conditions are more generic, but these slides should help you to identify the various conditions and understand them. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. What is the grant amount? The term and termination at the last I said, because term also would come here. So the grant term or period of contract, the grant amount and the purpose normally will come there. No pledge means you cannot use the money for taking any particular benefit or monetary advantage, because this is a grant. Then complementary funding का मतलब होता है cost matching. So is there complementary funding, or if there is any possibility in future for cost matching or cost, then this may mean that the donor might reduce their funding. Suppose the donor was funding it, but the same project somebody else wants to fund, that's what is complementary funding, and you will have to intimate to the donor that somebody else also wants to fund this particular piece. In case it's the same piece, if it is an extra piece, then it is co-financing or cost sharing. Okay. uh, Designated contacts. So these are the point of contact for the various aspects of the grant. So you will see that in each grant contract, you will have who is the POC, the point of contact. Conflict of interest and ethical conduct. So basically, this says that we will follow ethical behavior and we will ensure that there is no conflict of interest between the grantor and the grantee. That's the declaration. Confidentiality means the whatever is this grant contract will be kept confidential by both the parties. Termination. What is the condition for termination? Notices, how much period, that will be part of this. Notice of changes, notice of any changes that have to be made, then there has to be a written notice. It cannot be assumed that it has that changes happened. Compliance with laws. So various statutory laws, the grantee will comply with those laws, is something which is a blanket kind of a condition that is mentioned. Now, this is what puts a lot of onus on the grantee to ensure that they understand the laws and also comply with the laws. Indemnity means we do not indemnify for any of your action. If there is a loss because of your action, then we are not there to make good that particular loss. Publications and licenses, anything that is part of this contract, anything that gets generated out of this contract, what who will hold that, who will be, or will it be commonly held or jointly held, uh, any IPR that is there, intellectual property right that gets generated, how will it be dealt? Okay, will the publications be part of the grantor's kind of privilege, or will it be both? Okay, visibility and publicity, which means that if we have to do any publicity of any activity of or any particular output of this particular grant, how will that visibility publicity happen? How much visibility and publicity will happen? When will it happen? Is there guidelines on visibility and publicity by the donor? Okay, do we have some kind of a guidance for the organization in terms of visibility and publicity, is something that needs to be understood, because it cannot be unfettered visibility or publicity, because it can go in any direction. Force majeure means any action which is beyond the control of the two parties, which is what is called as the act of God. So if that happens, then that could mean that we will not be able to deliver. Either side may not be able to deliver in conditions of force majeure. Okay, act of God. So in that case, it is possible that the delivery is does not happen and the contract might have to be closed or may have to be suspended for that period of force majeure. Relationship of parties, they are all independent parties and therefore cannot be understood commonly, is what it means. What are the governing laws for this particular contract? Okay, laws of the country, basically any additional laws of a particular state in the federal structure, whatever. Notice, if it has to be given, where will it be given, to whom will it be given? Okay, waiver means that uh, both parties can sit together and say that this particular condition of the contract may not be uh, continued with, that is waiver. But that waiver will also be through a written arrangement where they will say that this part of this contract or this deliverable of this contract is being waived. Then you have severability. Severability means that any clause that may become unenforceable does not mean that the contract will become unenforceable, is what is severability. So any any clause which is not possible to comply can be severed from the main contract, but the main contract will not be enforceable. It will still be enforceable. Can we delegate? Can we assign our action or our program? Is something that will be no delegation, but it will have to be implemented. You can delegate, but to these people. Acknowledgement, basically that we have understood this contract and we give consent for moving ahead with signatures to the contract. Counterparty is counterparts. Counterparts actually means two parts of the same agreement. So the agreement can be in two parts, both being original and one of the one each to be kept by both the parties. Okay, therefore they are called counterparts. These are made in two parts. Entire agreement, this is a clause which says that this in along with any schedule is the entire agreement. This is the piece of paper or the document which completes our understanding for this particular engagement. Arbitration in case of any dispute. Jurisdiction, which state, which city, which area will the courts of that area. So for instance, if the grantor is in Delhi, it might say the courts in Delhi will have jurisdiction, even though you might be in any other state. So generally, the jurisdiction pertains to the state or the area where the donor is located, because that's more convenient. I'm not saying the jurisdiction will actually have a dispute and you will go for arbitration and then you will have to go to the next level in terms of civil courts. I'm not saying that, but we need to understand what is the meaning of jurisdiction. The courts that will have jurisdiction on any matters getting generated from this contract. Then remedies, which means any injunction or relief from the court for any kind of violation, something which is called as remedies available for both the parties. Okay, so that is are some of the conditions that are there as far as the general conditions are or more generic conditions are concerned. Now coming to the grant contract operational conditions. So this particular preamble that we had where we say we are now going to go ahead with a particular project and this is the object. What is the scope of work for that? Which means that what are the deliverables? What is it that in terms of activities that will be done? The scope of work can be an annexure to this particular to this SOW and will be part of the entire agreement. What are the deliverables? What is the budget? So you'll have the budget sheet, the budget narrative, all parts of this particular the operational side of the grant contract. That's why I've broken it down into two parts so that you understand the previous 2-3 slides were more generic conditions, which will be part of every grant contract generally with some variation. But the operational part will pertain to this particular project. That's what. So what are the eligible costs that are there? Okay. What about grant disbursement? As we had seen last time, whether it will be a disbursement as an advance or whether it will be a reimbursement, whether it will be performance based. What is the log frame and work plan? Again, can be a schedule, a separate annexure, just like the budget, just like the scope of work. So, or the scope of work may have the log frame and the work plan. Work plan will be generally a Gantt chart, which will say what activities will happen over each month or each quarter over the budget, over the grant contract. The basis of accounting, accrual basis of accounting, generally separate books of accounts for the project, which is basically the cost center based method for accounting for each projects. Again, respecting the concept of fund based accounting. Separate bank account, we have already seen whether it's a pool account or a separate bank account. How will you have bills and vouchers? Will you have them done for each cost centers separately, or will you have the same chronology of the vouchers, and but you will then deface them and mark them for these particular projects? All that might be specified in the operational side. What is the limit on cash expenditure? That's something that is also there. What is the treatment of interest? We have already discussed. What are the procurement rules? So at times they might accept your procurement policy. At times they might say you will have to follow our procurement policy in case of bigger donors, or maybe you can follow your procurement policy as long as we are satisfied that it covers all aspects relating to procurement. Then you'll have to get that approval from them. So what are the rules for procurement of goods and services for this particular project? And you'll have to follow those procurement rules, because if the procurement is not followed, then the expenditure may be disallowed. The program or the financial reporting. Okay. So generally there could be templates, and please remember the templates should be understood by both program people and finance people. Very, very important. Okay. So we've seen that happening because there is no standardization in terms of the templates for programmatic and financial reporting. So or donors may have their own formats, and therefore it's very important to understand and be consistent with that. Input tax credit, this pertains to purchase of goods. Okay. So when you purchase goods, there is the GST component there. NGOs are not exempt from GST. So, I mean, from payment of GST, when they purchase goods. Okay. So, they may be exempted from, charging GST. Okay. Exempted as a based on charitable activity definition under GST. But when you purchase goods, there will be a GST. You cannot say that I'm an NGO, therefore there should be no GST. So if there is GST on purchases, uh, what is the provision relating to GST or such value added taxes is might be defined in the grant contract. So it might say if you will take input tax credit against that, then that GST should not be claimed from us in the financial reports. If you are not claiming input tax credit because you are not registered under GST, then the whole of the cost may be recovered from us under the financial reporting. So that's something that you'll have to see what is the condition. Okay. If you are reporting at gross, which means your taxable amount plus GST, to the donor, then please do not take input tax credit because it will be a double dip. Okay, so one has to be very clear in terms of taxability. In case you are not registered under GST, then it is advisable that you clarify and certify to them that you're not, and therefore you will claim the entire amount of the invoice, including the GST, as a cost from the donor. Monitoring, evaluation, and audits. Okay. So monitoring will be periodic during the course. Evaluation and audit is more. Evaluation may be programmatic, and audits will be financial generally. If there are any disallowances, then there can be recovery. So what are the situations in which there could be a recovery? Okay. What is the treatment of fixed asset? Not all donors might give you the fixed assets. So while the fixed assets have been purchased under the grant and generally are allowed to be kept as fixed assets of the organization, some donors might say, well, these fixed assets at the end of the project have to be transferred to ABC. May not be to them, to the donor, but maybe to the community-led organizations or to the public authority or somebody, whatever it is. uh, Say for instance, even for CSR expenditure, if the corporate does it, then they cannot retain the fixed assets. Some of the bigger donors, USAID, EU, they also stipulate that the fixed assets should be transferred, and they make that mandatory unless there is no public authority, no collective, or no such person who will want to take that, is capable of taking that asset and using it. Only then in that case they might give you a no dues in terms of retaining the first assets. But you must see what are the conditions laid out for treatment of fixed assets. Just as you have to see what are the conditions laid out for uh, treatment of interest. Okay, income generated from the project activity, again, whether it will be additive, how will it be dealt with? So if there is any income that gets generated from a program activity which is funded through the grant, how will that be dealt with? Will that be income, business incidental income, or which can be retained by you? In that case, it's unrestricted. But if it has to be deployed on the project, then you'll have to see how it has to be done. Sustainability is basically the impact side. So there can be a condition which says the impact or the outcome is, and what is meant by sustainability of this particular action or this particular project is something that gets defined. Closing of the grant, okay, is something which is very important, and there is always going to be a closure of grant condition in the contract, and it will say at the time of grant closure 1 2 3 4 is what you'll have to actually do. So please ensure that there is a proper closure of the grant. Otherwise, if the grant remains open, then several years down the line also there can be some questions that the grantor may ask, and you may not even have the documents available for being able to answer. So the closure, which we had seen as post-award final stage in the life cycle of a grant, is becoming very very important, because that settles all the issues relating to the grant at the time of closure of that grant. Record retention. So the grant contract might insist on a certain amount of number of years for retention of both program and finance records. However, for the finance records, we suggest the maintenance of books of accounts and records provision in income tax, which says 10 years from the end of the relevant assessment year, is something that should be followed, even though the grant may say a lesser number of years, because you see this is something that has come from the from law in terms of income tax. So the income tax department's decision or rule 17AA is something that will overrule any kind of other conditions that might come be put by other donors or any other body. Now, grant management challenges. So this is the third part. So we have done the second part, which is understanding the various general and operational conditions of the grant. Now coming to the grant management challenges. So the biggest challenge is consistent relationship with the grantor. Now I have no quick solution to that, but what I'm saying is, how do you cultivate a grantor is a big challenge for NGOs. And this cultivating of the grantor ensures the continuity of the of the engagement. And bigger organizations today, if you see their financials, you will find that those donors have been there for with them for 10 to 15 to 20 years. So there has been some difference in terms of this relationship, or cultivating this relationship, or nurturing this relationship with the grantor, which is very very important and is a big challenge for small medium organizations. Turnover and lack of expertise, again the HR part for grant management especially. Use of technology. How do you use technology, uh, whether in terms of your activities, whether in terms of available technological, ready-made technological tools, is something that's a challenge that needs to be overcome. Bigger organizations have ways of using technology because they have access to how to use it. Then program and finance MIS non-robust, which means the program MIS is not updated. Even if you do not have a proper automated MIS, do you have a good way of collecting whatever MIS has got collected of the program from the ground? Has it been put into proper shape? This is the biggest challenge. Okay, I'm not saying whether you have a you know automated program MIS, but do you have a program MIS which is authentic, which is valid, and from where you can do analysis, even though it may be on Excel? Similarly for finance MIS, okay, Tally is the biggest tool there, and use Tally in terms of grant budget monitoring, budget control, and overall grant management. Timely decisions is something that is more generic, which means that both on program and finance side or the budget size, whatever variation or deviations happen, do we take decisions with the donor on time is what I'm saying. Not only in terms of implementation, but having to deal with a situation where some action needs to be taken. Audit findings and reputational loss is something that is also coming up, because now, because unless you have the proper due diligence and your records are in order, the audit will definitely throw up some observations, and it can tarnish your reputation, with the result that re-allotment or re-grant or a renewal of the or an extension of another of the same grant or a new grant may not come forth. So one has to be very clear that the audit they should come out, these organizations should come out properly. Now, how to manage grants effectively? Again, so the challenges is something that gives us some answers. In managing grant is about maximizing impact. At the end of the day, every donor is looking at what is it that in terms of impact and sustainability that you are bringing on the table. And therefore, a lot of the grants are now very, very objectively talking. They're not subjective. I've put a word subjectivity versus objectivity. So if you have ways of capturing data, which then you can show as maximizing an impact and sustaining that impact, is what is the objectivity that they love. A thought out project plan is very, very important for effective management. And the thought out project plan is what I was talking to you. Both the program folks and the finance folk have to sit down and conceive a project plan, not just make something which you have to just give to the donor. That's what is our commonly the way we work. Clear communication and transparency, very, very important. Can the donor see through everything that you are doing? Honesty has to be there. Communication with the donor has to be very, very effective. Good communication. And therefore, if you have the right kind of people who can communicate and on the same wavelength, the donors, it is a very big help. Robust financial management systems. Similarly, monitoring mechanism for physical and financial program, all those things is something that we have already seen. You must have a financial management system where the expenditure comes for the previous month by the 5th or 6th or 7th, so that it gives you time to collate that and to take action on that. Okay. Compliance with grant terms and conditions that we have already seen. Final reporting and audit, that is the closeout and audit. Okay. So if you are working on these things, grant closeout, you are working on the grant audit. I was just seeing a admin finance manual where the organization says, well, if the grant is more than 10 lakh rupees, whether the grantor is asking for an audited UC or not, we will give an audit UC. It's a very good, USP for that organization, that they are saying that they will voluntarily get that audited. It might cost another 5-10,000 rupees, but then it gives a more authentic way of, presenting your financial data, that this has been validated by a third party. Okay. Impact and sustainability, we have already done it. So communication is the key, is something very, very important. If you are honest, if your communication is straightforward, I think you will be a winner. Then you must have a grant calendar, which I've been saying right from the day. Every grant must have, that file must have a calendar where all specific timelines have to be marked and they have to be updated. You might have it on the file, you might have it on an Excel sheet, whatever it is, but there has to be somebody during grant monitoring to see whether this calendar, all that needs to be done, has been checkbox or not. Create a resource library or repository, which means all your previous projects that you have done, can you make use of those resources or that library for pitching for new grants? Review before submitting a proposal, so you can get a third party or third eye or to see whether everything looks matching. Sometimes what happens is that we think that this proposal is going to work wonders, but if you give it to a third person and give a third eye to see whether it really is the case, because we are so involved in our organization that we think whatever we are doing is the right thing, or whatever we are doing is probably the thing that should happen. It may not be the case, and therefore that kind of edit might help you to, some bit of tweaking, and it might be work wonders for you. Collaborate means that you might want to look at other organizations who might also be like-minded, and therefore you might have a bigger project, because some small organizations may not have financially that backing, which might give help, which might give them, but they might be programmatically very good. So look at ways of collaboration. Be on top of your costs while budgeting. There's nothing more I can say. We've been talking of cost, which means that you recover your costs. You cover your costs properly. You budget your cost and recover your cost properly. Never say die. So I have a lot of organizations which say we will never get funds. But that's not the case. Uh, what is your unique story is what you should be encashing, not just chasing the fund. This is something that you must see. So the resource library will give you your unique story. Your work in the past will give you your unique story. Can you put that unique story in a compelling manner, uh, rather than just say that we want fund for this activity? Okay. Objectivity versus subjectivity. Basically, objectivity is the numbers game. The subjectivity is the qualitative aspect, what will get reinforced through the numbers. So I think with that, I close this presentation. So the key takeaway today's presentation has been, one, in terms of understanding budgets, the facets of budgets and the types of budgets, the construction of a budget, the various. The second one was on terms and conditions of grant. Very important to understand the terms and conditions. Very important to follow them. And the third, of course, is the some points that I thought should also be taken home in terms of successful grant management. So with that, I complete this course. So all our discussion today has been around how do you ensure the systems and processes and policies that can help you then create the environment of the right internal controls and the right communication to the donor. That's what is the entire story behind grant management. Okay. So, and it's no rocket science. It's very, very simple. The only thing is appropriate time, appropriate data, and appropriate action is something that has to be ensured as far as grant management is concerned. So with that, if there are any questions, we can take the questions.
Sharad sir, I have a question.
Go ahead,
Hello.
Iti.
Yeah. So the Patek library, that link you have shared, is it accessible to only the participants of this group, or anyone can access and see those videos, like these sessions videos?
Anybody. So just to reiterate and restate this,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to mention this to you, that this initiative has been done with Sati Development as the knowledge partner, and funded by the Rohini Nilekani Foundation. And of course, there's a technology partner, which is the T4G Foundation. Now, what this PATIC has is three components. One is the library. The library has not only this due diligence thing, that the 5 sessions, it has repository on non-finance, it has repository on statutory compliance, so many of those uh, components that are there, including on GST, including on several things, and we are continuing to add that. So the library has two things. One is our own presentations and the FAQs on various aspects related to compliance and for not-for-profits. That's the library. The second one is, of course, the podcast, which is the Spotify podcast, where from the library we have created conversations as a podcast, in the form of a podcast. So for instance, if we have a library book on social security laws, I've using AI, we have converted that into a podcast, like a conversation. Very, very helpful. You can just listen it in your while returning home, and it's such a good conversation that you'll not get bored, but the message will go to you. And the third one is what is called as the forum. Now, the forum is something where I am putting in all updates that are happening under law as recent as FCRA or anything for that matter. And we are continuously going to update that. And we are also putting a tax oblique compliance calendar on that, which will have monthly, month by month, what are the dates and what are the compliances for not for profits, okay, throughout from January to December. Of course, barring changes that might in dates that might be allowed by authorities, that's a different matter. But the forum also gives you an option to sign up. Okay, so for the library and for podcast and for forum, if you just want to read, no sign up, no sign in, no sign up is required. But if you want to ask a question, or if you want to interact, or if you want to comment, or you want to post something which you think is important for everybody, then you need a sign up, which you can do. There's a sign up facility there on the forum. You can sign up and you will become a member of the community. No cost there, but you will be then able to participate in conversations on the forum. Now, this Patek uh, is enables is a tool which can be accessed to everybody. I mean, there is no bar in terms of number of people who can participate or who can go to this or sign up, or the number of persons who can go to this, to the various three components of uh, Patek. What we are also trying to do is to add a kind of an IVR, which is again a helpline number, where if you want, you can ask a question on the phone instead of writing. And the IVR is also AI enabled, which means that from our repository on Patek, in the library especially, the AI is going to give you an answer to that to the extent possible. And maybe if the answer is not fully there, you can say, well, we need more details, which then can come from somebody at the back end. So this is something that's work in progress, and we are continuously improving this tool. I can only tell you there is nothing like this in this sector that we are trying to contribute for the not-for-profits. So this is my answer to you. You can share this with as many people and let as many people benefit from this as possible. The big thing about the library is that the entire content can be translated into any language. So nobody can say, I can't read this English, I can't read, I can understand. You read it in whatever language you want, Kannada, Malayali, whatever. So that's my
Thank
answer,
you.
Iti.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
This has been a lot of hard work, and this is still work in progress. We have just launched it. So we are going to improve it by the day and improve content by the day. And this content is all for free. So you can recommend this Patek to as many people as possible and let people get benefited as much as possible. Because this is
Sure.
only for the not-for-profit. This is to all the participants, please.
Yes, sir. Yes. This solves the query that I was having. No? Yeah. Thank you.
So at this point of time, for the not-for-profit sector, there is no single point where you can go and get information specific to the sector, or ask for information specific to the sector, or listen to information, but that information is still in listening is still in English. Sorry, we have not been able to convert that into regional languages. But if people are conversant with English, there's only one language there, still English, on the podcast. But the podcasts are so good to listen that they are more like stories. And so, you normally have a conversation between two people. The entire messaging or the knowledge gets transferred through that conversation. All right, if there are no more questions, we are 5 minutes ahead of our time today. We have taken many, many more minutes in the previous four sessions. So, with that, a big thank you to all of you. Thank you. This was our first batch for the due diligence and donor and grant management. It's been a success. And we have tried to do justice with all coverage as much as possible. Thank you very much.